Peas on Moss is brought to you by Kimberly Schaub, a culinary scientist turned business developer. Over the past 4 years, the audience has downloaded episodes over 40,000 times, and we have 1,500 impressions across the website and a host of social media platforms. Will you consider contributing to the show to help keep it on air? Donations through Patreon help to offset the cost of web hosting, editing, and producing the various Peas on Moss offerings, from podcast episodes to videos, and every little bit helps. From corporate advertisement to sponsored content and private contributions. Reach out to me on peasonmoss.com for details. Chief Sustainability Officer Laura Asiala has the mindset of a CEO and the heart of a teacher. She was one of the guides and creators of the WholeWorks Leading the Sustainability Transformation Professional Certificate course that Griffith Foods sponsors for its developing and middle career leaders. I admire her ability to take nebulous and complex subjects and distill them into key takeaways without the creation of heuristics and shortcuts that risk losing sight of the root cause or key sticking point of a problem. Although she's not from the food industry, Laura joins the podcast to give us a quick primer on sustainability and principal concepts that she has observed that can apply to the food industry. I invited her to help kick off this big concept as Peas on Moss begins exploring what it means for us food professionals to make an impact on our industry today so that it can continue to serve eaters and producers in the future. Laura mentioned a few keywords in the discussion, and I wanted to add some detail about them here. First, she referenced the Brundtland Report, written by Gro Harlem Brundtland in 1987. This was a United Nations report of the World Commission on Environment and Development, titled Our Common Future. The primary concept is that sustainable development, quote, meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That was in section 3.27 in that report. Laura also mentioned SASB, or the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, a nonprofit organization that offers an assessment of key ESG issues that should be the focus of different industries, such as water and land management concerns for the meat, poultry, and dairy industries. The focus areas or key concerns are slightly different for each industry, even within food, and are a decent place to start when seeking to understand what your industry might be concerned about. ESG itself stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, and is the quick phrase for key concerns for the industries today. Finally, Laura also mentioned a Just 100 listing. This is an annual report published by Just Capital, a purpose-driven, not-for-profit organization that identifies and analyzes stakeholder key issues and tracks publicly traded companies' performances in these areas. Okay, that should do it for the references to help you track this conversation. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Peas on Moss podcast, Laura. I am so excited to invite you to the show to meet some of the Peas on Moss podcast audience, virtually and mostly from our side. But I'm just excited for them to meet you and get to know you, Laura Asiala, learn about WholeWorks and leading the sustainability transformation, and to learn about sustainability and how we absolutely must pick up the mandate of sustainability and how we have to transform the food industry. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us and helping us learn about sustainability.
Kimberly, it's just my joy to be with you today. As one of the leaders of transformation, I really appreciate all of the work that you do in leading transformation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So for those who have just tuned in to our conversation, I am connected to Laura through being an alumna of the Leading Sustainability Transformation training. And that was something that Griffith Foods sponsored several kind of up-and-coming leaders in the organization to participate in. And that corporate sponsorship of that program really helped several of us start to have our interest really piqued in sustainability, and for us to learn immediately how we're going to use the training and the principles of sustainability in the food industry at Griffith Foods. So first and foremost, thank you for writing that program, for being a guide and teacher in the program. It's a 10-week program that is a commitment, and it is worth every extra minute and hour that we put into it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for igniting that fire in my soul.
Well, I appreciate that, Kimberly. And I will add here that the program Leading the Sustainability Transformation is available to all professionals and experienced leaders if they'd like to participate in it. We make it available directly to important corporations like Griffith Foods, who have a very committed and well-funded approach to sustainability, which I really appreciate. And also we make it available through affiliates. And in North America, that's the University of Victoria in Canada and Green Biz in the United States. So anyone who's listening to this who is beyond their baccalaureate education is welcome to investigate this program if they're interested in and join us. Our next session starts on February 28th and we'll go to May 8th. That's a 10-week program. It's part-time. It's completely virtual. And people need to register no later than February 21st for that. So thanks for letting me put that little plug in there. I really appreciate it because we'd just love to attract more people like you.
Absolutely. And folks who are listening, if you have questions, certainly feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you all about the program, the commitment. And I would say jump in if you're thinking about it at all. If you're 10% curious, come and ask, find out about the program. There's a kind of a really good informational website about what the program is. And I would say carve the time for it. If you're only hearing about it now and you only have, say, a month and a half of heads up to sign up, then definitely get on the list for the next session at minimum, because I found it to be really transformational in my mindset. And full disclosure, I'm in the University of Victoria MBA program now because I learned about them from this program. So for me, it was and will be referred to as a pivotal moment in my life, and kind of helping me understand what I could do in my future. So again, thank you to Griffith Foods for sponsoring us, Laura, and the team for putting it together, and the energy. It's, as a student, it's a lot of time. So as an instructor and a creator of the program, it must have been so much time for you. So yeah, thank you.
Well, like I said, it's a joy, and it's really, we're a very purpose-driven organization, and we are committed to true sustainability. And true sustainability happens at the enterprise level. Mm-hmm. So it's supported by important aspects of advocacy and legislation and regulation. But really, we believe that the power to transform our world sustainably belongs at a significant part with the leaders who lead commercial enterprises, whether those are private or public. And that capital is an important force in the world. Commerce is an important force in the world. It can be used as a force for good, or it can be used as a force for evil. And we choose good, and we choose that to focus on how enterprise can become more sustainable, environmentally and social, and therefore more just. So we are all about a more just and sustainable world. And we recognize that profit is required for enterprise. That is not a 4-letter word at WholeWorks. We've devised a practice session in our simulation, which is a key part of our program, to say, how do you transform a traditional company into a sustainable company? And by the way, you still have to meet your shareholders' expectations, because without that, you don't sustain your enterprise. So that's really at the core of what we do at WholeWorks.
Absolutely. You brought out a few key terms that I'd really like us to start with. Let's start with the much longer than 4 letters, sustainability. It seems like such a moving target. So from your enterprise experiences as a chief sustainability officer today, how would you, if we're riding to the 48th floor in an elevator together, right, how would you talk about sustainability in our 48 seconds?
All right. So from floor 1 to floor 3, I'm going to say that the United Nations Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainability is still the best and most essential. It says meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Or as one of my favorite authors, Barbara Kingsolver once said, trying not to wreck every flippin' thing on the planet while you're here. I think that's a really, really important thing. But if you go a deeper level, then you have to look at what the implications are there. So a lot of people refer to the triple bottom line, and that's really convenient. It's a really quick mnemonic, right? People, planet, profit. And my friend Catherine Winkler once described that to me as the 3 E's: equity, ecosystems, and economy. And I like that one too. But what it's talking about is the fact that you have to consider these 3 things. And sometimes looking at the triple bottom lines is not the best metaphor, because it kind of sounds like you could focus on one and not the other 2, or you could focus on 2 and not the other one. And really, you have to look at them more like a braid, like how they come together. Or alternatively, I think another good metaphor are concentric circles. So think about the largest circle being the natural ecological systems which sustain our lives. There is no economy on a dead planet. I love Katherine Hayhoe's latest book. She's written it. It's called Saving Us. And her main thesis there is we are not saving the planet. The planet will continue to revolve, third rock from the sun, for infinity. We are saving us. The second circle is the social systems in which we live as human beings. How well does commerce function in high conflict zones? Right. It doesn't. And we've all had a firsthand experience now to see what happens in the economy when we're hit with a global pandemic, which impacts both physical and social health. And then finally, the smallest circle, and the only one we actually get to define, is economic. That system requires the health of the other 2 systems. So, of course, the metaphor of concentric circles is just like what I've said. It's a metaphor. It's not reality. It's the way a map is to terrain. But I think if you think about how you can constantly be putting these 3 points of sustainability together, the most sustainable enterprises and the leaders leading them, are constantly artfully intertwining those 3 in order to thrive and in order for their organizations to be sustained.
So thinking about sustainability and the principles, really interwoven the way that you described, how do you see that being lived out in the food industry or for food businesses?
Okay, so I want to take a step back and say, I have a lot of international business experience. I've spent, I'm actually on my 39th anniversary this month in my career. And I spent 30 years of that in big industry, heavy manufacturing, a lot of that in the materials science. So having said all of that, what I want you to know is I have quite a lot of experience in sustainability, and I have quite a lot of experience in both international development and manufacturing. And I eat, and sometimes I cook. And that's my expertise in the food industry. So I want to make sure that your audience understands, because I think you talk to a lot of people who have a lot of experience in the food industry. And I just want to characterize myself as not having that level of expertise. But I do have expertise in sustainability. So in thinking about the food industry, I can think of 4 trends, I think, that come immediately to my mind. Okay. So in the first place, I think when you talk about the food industry, you have to talk about where food starts. So you didn't ask me to comment on the agricultural industry, but I kind of think those 2 things are pretty much the same. So certainly there has been increasing emphasis on sustainable agriculture. By the way, that's one of the things that we do integrate into our living case, into our simulation, in our program. And now I think we see it coming one step even more beyond sustainable, which is regenerative. And I would characterize regenerative and sustainable agriculture as direct opposites to what potentially could be regarded as the nature of the agricultural industry historically, which may be perhaps more extractive. So that's not to damn everyone in the food industry or in agriculture. I think that that's been coming over time to determine how can you meet, as the Brundtland Commission talked about, the needs of people today, while also ensuring that the basic necessities of soil and water and all of the things that are required to have a sustainable, safe agricultural space. And now it's more regenerative. So the first trend that I see is a real emphasis on regeneration or regenerative agriculture. The second trend is more what I would characterize in the food industry, and that is the need to reduce food waste. So we hear a lot about the circular economy in manufacturing. And when I started working with Griffith Foods, because we had so many of your colleagues in our course in the last couple of years, I have seen circular economy referred to in the food industry. And I think that's also about that really gets at the point of reducing waste. I had not realized this until a few years ago that the greenhouse gases that come off of decomposing food is actually one of the biggest contributors of greenhouse gases in the world, which just really shocked me. And Eric Schultz and John Mandyke wrote a book called Food Foolish a few years ago that just was gobsmacking to me. In developing and emerging economies, I think this tends to be more field to market, and that's known as post-harvest loss. And it's usually the result of poor logistics or poor packaging or lack of supply chain or processing or preserving capability. And then in countries where there's more developed transportation and manufacturing infrastructure like the United States, I think food waste tends to be more market to fork. So it's the food waste that happens in grocery stores or farm markets and restaurants and at home where we throw food away. The third trend, I would say, are the things that are common across multiple manufacturing industries, because the food industry has a really important aspect of manufacturing. So you can think about those being largely focused on the environment, like the need to reduce or reclaim water that's used in processing, or the need to be more energy efficient or to source energy from more renewable sources, or the need to be more efficient in mobility and logistics. For example, electrifying transportation in the supply chain. These are all huge trends that impact the food industry, but not only the food industry. So those are big trends for sustainability and in manufacturing. And then I think the last trend that I want to identify in terms of sustainability in the food industry in particular, I think, is this notion of food justice and the increasing recognition that affordable, accessible, nourishing, delicious food should be available to all people. And the world has always had food deserts, but I think we are now as a society just much more aware of that and recognizing that in every aspect and recognizing those challenges. And those often attract, philanthropic considerations and food pantries and food drives. Those are really, really important. And they're really a necessary emergency response. But by definition, they aren't sustainable. In the long run, in the food industry, innovative enterprise is really the only sustainable way to do that. In our last session of leading the sustainability transformation, we had a leader from one of the leading suppliers to grocery stores in the United States. And one of the projects that she chose early on in consideration in the project that we coach each one of our participants through was to upgrade a local food bank. And my challenge to her was, you're in the grocery business. Why aren't you thinking about how to make food more affordable and accessible to people in this community so that they can buy it? And that was then the project that she took on. And I don't want to make this sound like any of this is easy. None of this is easy. If it were easy, it would already be done. It's not done. Lots of opportunities here. But I'm curious, Kimberly, so I just rattled off those 4 trends. What do you think? Does that match with your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to think if I would rearrange the order of those at all, coming again from the inside of a B2B part of the food industry, where we as a spice company supply CPGs, and regenerative agriculture as a way of thinking about our agricultural system is in conversation, and there are some very big CPGs that have made specific goals about how much they want to source from regenerative agriculture certified land. But it is not center stage yet. And so I would say it's not, as far as the adoption curve goes, I'd say it's still coming, not mainstream yet. And there's a lot of debate within regenerative agriculture and the organic world about what we're really going to define as regenerative. Does regenerative agriculture require soil, or are hydroponics a path forward? Because that helps us reduce our actual land footprint. And that debate's being held at very complex and high levels in some senses. And I think farmers might argue, they might make really good cases on both sides. So I think I would put food waste as our number one opportunity. And that could be, like you said, a lot of food waste in developed and high income nations is between the market and the consumer. So there's a lot of opportunity for education. And I think that's a really great sweet spot for research chefs to exist, because we have the ability to do new food product development. And we have the opportunity to touch consumers while they're eating. You know, if they're coming into our restaurants, then we can influence the choices that they make because we chose the menu, right? We built that menu. We chose to source from whom we did. And in food manufacturing settings or in packaged food world, chefs have the opportunity to influence the purchasing of those organizations. And that's a really big way that we can impact our supply chain and our value chain very directly. A lot of us have the ability at minimum to influence the types of purchases and those companies. And like you said, kind of at the kickoff of our conversation, capital is what makes change occur, right? When we put our dollars towards one choice and not the other, we're voting for this, and then we make that happen. And I think that's where we as chefs really need to be paying attention. And that's where we need to be helping direct money to go.
I just want to add,
yes, please.
You all make things cool. Right? So, so just as we're sitting here talking, I just think that, I'm just looking at my own life, and I'm thinking to myself, 50 years ago, my mother got the Bon Appetit magazine. She was always, my mother is a wonderful cook, a wonderful hostess. We never had Thanksgiving at our house with less than 30 people, because that was just the way my parents were. And, so she paid attention to food before paying attention to food was really cool. Now it's the Food Network, and we get the Food Network magazine. And my youngest daughter gives her grandmother the New York Times food subscription, which she also buys, and they use it as an opportunity to connect. My youngest daughter lives in Ecuador. So that becomes something that my 28-year-old daughter and my 83-year-old mother are connecting on, and they're talking about food, and my sons-in-law are really connected on food. When I was first married, the only thing my husband ever did was throw raw meat that I bought and prepared on a grill, flipped it, to which everybody applauded, and I did everything else, and people took it for granted. I'm sorry if that sounds sexist. I was married in 1983. That was my reality.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, now it's cool to be involved in food. And how do we educate people to use all of the food?
Mm.
And I would love to see something on the Food Network that's the opposite of Chopped. Every time I watch that show, I go, oh my God, they're just like throwing stuff away because they're in such a hurry to make something out of their weird ingredients. And I want to go, wait, where's the really creative, novel thing that comes from, here's food that we have available to us that's already been prepared. And, in my house, we make soup and we make fajitas, or we never have leftovers. We only have sometimes dinners of small plates.
It's a marketing thing, right?
Totally a marketing thing. And I just think how wonderful it is. And I recognize the power of chefs to start trends that are positive, because I live in a world now where oatmeal and Brussels sprouts are both trendy and delicious. And if you had told me that 60 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah, well, I could go so many directions with this, but I think I'll go
let's go back to sustainability. But I think you're right. And I think I want to say one other thing, because you talked about what's the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that every enterprise has an opportunity to make a step change in sustainability. Every single enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
If an enterprise has never considered environmental or social issues, those are environmental, social, that's the E and the S on ESG factors. The G stands for governance, right? So if you want to look at environmental or social factors that impact your business, so ESG plus how it impacts your business, that is sustainability. It's just a different way of saying it. Look at what your business needs. All businesses need 5 things. Start with revenue. Do you want to make new products available, right? So, when we're talking about a waste stream, is there a way that you can transform a waste stream into a product stream? Now, in the materials manufacturing world, that's all of what we do for decades. So I'm sure it's something that you do in the food industry as well. Reduce your costs, reducing energy, reducing water, reducing ingredients by eliminating quality defects. All 3 of those things are really essential to reducing costs. Who can object to reducing energy if you reduce costs? So those 2 things go right to the bottom line. Workforce is another really, really important thing to consider. How do you make your enterprise more inclusive and more capable? Well, you can do training, you can revise processes, you can install different equipment. And by the way, a lot of times when you're doing any of those things, you're also reducing energy and effort, making one of the things that I remember from one of your colleagues, honestly, Kimberly, is the notion of simply changing the way they received certain ingredients in the plant that allowed people with less upper body strength to participate in that processing. That typically allows then for more women to work. Oh, and by the way, when you do that, then you have less men getting hurt. So maybe they had the upper body strength, but now they have lower, or they have a better safety record. So you have workforce. The 4th thing is, how do you attract capital? And the way that you can do that by making yourself a more sustainable company, by paying attention to environmental, social, and governance factors that have a material impact on your profitability, will attract more affordable or more capital. And then finally, how do you get the whole system that you're in working better? And you can kind of think about that as your supply chain. How do you make your supply chain better, more resilient, more affordable, more accessible? How do you make your value chain even more generative? So how do you emphasize new markets, new customers, or getting a bigger share of wallet? So all 5 of those things, every single business needs to do every single day. And if you're just thoughtful, you can be thinking about that, how you get more bang for your buck with environment and social considerations as well.
Absolutely. And the governance piece, right? From a management perspective, you have to have senior leadership commitment all the way down. And I would argue it would be good to have buy-in at the quote unquote lowest levels, to the hourly worker who doesn't get to sit in on the strategy meetings. They do get to experience the improvement in safety and the kind of more able, aware sorts of modifications for receiving so that they can be safer and we can be more inclusive in the types of people we get to hire. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I would say that while from top to bottom, that commitment is really important to get to optimize every enterprise, you also, candidly, if you're a leader in the food industry, you have to start from where you are.
Yeah.
So if you're in charge of a line in a food manufacturing plant and you don't have, quote unquote, the support above, you will know what challenges there are in that line on that factory floor. Now, what are the solutions that you can bring that take into consideration more than simply money? Money is important. I don't want to say it's not important, but what can you do to make that business case and make it more sustainable? So a lot of times in the work that I've done and pre-COVID, when I was speaking a lot more publicly at conferences, one of the questions that I get the most is, how do I find a job in sustainability? And I will always turn that back around and say, wrong question. How do you make your job more about sustainability? Because there is ample opportunity to move every enterprise, every organization towards the next level. And that's what we need to do. Just consistently doing that is just really a critical success factor.
Absolutely. So we've spent about 20 minutes talking kind of about the theories of sustainability. We've looked at specific applications in the food industry. So looking forward into 2022 and beyond, I'm here to say, okay, you're celebrating your 39th plus year in the industries, and as an educator, what gets you up every day and what are you really excited for 2022 in sustainability?
Well, I think the thing that I'm really, really excited about these days is that I see the ESG and the recognition of the material factors that impact your profit now directly tying those things causally to the bottom line. I find that to be really exciting because now sustainability is not a saddlebag. It has to be integrated across the organization. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about forever. But as soon as we started talking about ESG, and as soon as we started talking about people who are looking at investments and considering the return on the companies, and there's quite a lot of research now that talk about the material aspects of environment, social, and governance on the bottom line. And that's what SASB is, right? Those are the sustainable accounting standards for it. And when you look at that at the SASB, you will find that there are different environmental, social, and governance factors for every industry, because there are certain factors in certain industries that are critically important and are only peripherally important in other industries, right? So the key is, can you focus on your most material ones? And SASB is a great place to go and start there. But here's the thing that's really exciting. The CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer, and the CFO, the Chief Financial Officers, are now BFFs. And that's powerful. That's awesome. I absolutely love hearing investor calls when investors are asking now about that, because that's what drives that behavior. Probably one of the best investor calls I had seen in demonstrating this was Jim Fitterling, with a call that they did. Jim Fitterling is the CEO of Dow Inc. And I want to say this investor call was around November of 2021. And in his opening comments, he just did a brilliant job of showing to investors with multiple examples of how Dow was attending to their markets and to their operations, and how they had integrated environmental and social factors that were material to the chemical industry right inside of there. And it's not a big coincidence. Earlier this week, I saw that they were named to the top 100 companies of just companies, right? Now, full disclosure, I worked for the Dow Corning Corporation for nearly 30 years before I retired. I never worked for Dow. It was a joint venture between Dow and Corning when I worked for Dow, but I have this really weird situation now where I'm a retiree of a company that I never actually worked for. But I know those people and I know them well. And I will tell you that they are not perfect. None of you are. None of us are. And they have made huge strides and make material contributions and are one of the leaders in demonstrating how to make the world more sustainable. And I appreciate that. So anyways, I just point to that because I really appreciate the way that Jim, stood up and talked about that with investors. Earlier, you talked about, Kimberly, the way that we vote with our money, right? And so it's really easy to think of that in terms of being a customer, but most adults, at least in this part of the world, are also investors, whether they are through their 401ks or for their 403bs or their IRAs. And you also get to be, when you're an investor, you're an owner of a public company, and you get to make those calls. A great example of that was the Little Engine investment firm that threw the oil and gas industry for a loop last year. So yes, the CFOs, the chief financial officers, now are increasingly understanding the importance of environment, social, and governance factors. And with that helps to build the case and business case and deploy capital. So I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. It is exciting to see where we can go, how we're building these conversations across the different areas of expertise. As research staffs and product developers, we get a very kind of boots on the ground experience, and we can inform on the technology. And I think it's incumbent on us, research staffs, to stay on top of what those technological improvements are. As we start thinking about the future of work, automation, AI learning, all of those things, we need to be ahead of that curve, understand how to guide it, I think. And then how does that influence how we work, where we work, and how can we start to be more inclusive and more sustainable in how we treat our labor before we get treated in some senses, right? You can either own the solve, or you can get owned and someone will make those decisions for you. So I would say it's a bit of a call to action, right? For all of us in technical roles, for those of us who've moved on to other parts of the business.
Sure.
Just because we're in different parts of the desk doesn't mean that we lose part of that voice. Your voice is still your agent for change. So do that, and if we're hearing a theme song for some motivational movie, then that's the right theme song probably in the back of the mind.
And I think the other thing that I want to emphasize here is that we need to reinforce positive movement.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start looking at environmental, social, governance factors that are material to a business, and you see individuals or you see leaders take that first step, rather than saying, well, it's about time, or, well, it's great they made one step, there's still 100 steps to go. We could offer each other a little bit more appreciation and a little more grace.
Mm.
And I think about the work that we do at WholeWorks and what we teach in leading the sustainability transformation. And one of the things we talk about is appreciative inquiry, which is a practice that was first pioneered by David Cooper Ryder at Case Western Reserve University and his colleagues. I had the really great fortune to study with David 25 years ago when that practice was still new. And I love it when we say, look at the best of what is. How can we build on the best of what is? Also recognizing that there are gaps that we want to fill. So when you see somebody moving in the right way, even if that wasn't their intent, you can say things like, wow, you've improved the process efficiency here. I noticed that we have so much less waste than we had before. That's a tremendous contribution to sustaining our environment. So help people frame it, help them see what they're doing, help them see what they're making possible. I think about Griffith's Foods mission statement, and I'm not going to be able to recite it, although I'm always impressed with everybody who attends the course who can just snap that off. But they talk about nourishing the world. Mm-hmm. Wow, talk about a line of sight. What a cool thing to spend your life doing, nourishing the world, making food delicious, affordable, accessible. That's wow. That's every single person that works in Griffith Foods contributes to that. That's amazing. Help other people see that.
Yeah. Well, for my boss who's listening, probably we blend care and creativity to nourish the world.
Thank you. And it is, and they are, I just want to go on record as saying they are extremely full of care and creative individuals. That has been my experience with everyone that I worked with in Griffith Foods. But I think nourishing the world is oh, that's a cool thing to spend your life on.
Yeah. Yeah. There is so much more I want to talk about. And so, Laura, I think we're going to have to plan another episode together. For those who've completed their commute across their living rooms these days, we'll call the episode here, but with a promise to get back together and do a 2.0. Thank you so much for your generous time, your incredible wisdom and insights, both on this episode itself and for me personally. I appreciate you so much as a mentor and a friend, and as a guide, for the, I think we've, a couple hundred people who've gone through LST across the years. And I appreciate yours and Matt's and Stacy's efforts to keep us all connected globally. It's been pretty fun to see content that you put on to LinkedIn and the alumni meetings from wherever we're calling in from. And it's been a lot of fun to be part of a movement. So I appreciate that. And I celebrate the journey that got us here. So thank you again so much. I'm going to give you last word to sign off with the podcast audience. And then folks, again, the WholeWorks Leading Sustainability Transformation course. The next one starts February 24th.
28th. February 28th. Yep. With registration by February 21st. So
there we go.
I just really appreciate it. And Kimberly, I will return my gratitude to you and to your colleagues, thank you for all of the work that you do to make us a healthier and happier place, well-nourished and with delicious food. So I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for your commitment to a sustainable future, because you are one of the sustainability leaders that it is our joy with whom to work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. As my interest and passion in food sustainability has come into stark focus, I have been shifting the conversations on Peas on Moss to the roles and responsibilities that we research chefs, product developers, food business leaders, and operators all share in addressing the environmental changes that will jeopardize our food chain, in addition to our prime directives of producing quality, safe, delicious food. The food industry, from food service and packaged foods and all the infrastructure and manufacturing that make it an industry, must take actions to recognize and adapt current practices in order to ensure supply of food for future generations. These include more thoughtful land management and resource use, the development of a circular economy to reduce product that is wasted, to consider supply chains closer to home, to pay agriculture workers livable and equitable wages for quality lives, more thoughtful product innovation that satisfies our ever-curious palates and also addresses climate change issues, and a just distribution of nutritious food, and better education about the interconnectedness of quality food and health outcomes. The WholeWorks Leading the Sustainability Transformation Professional Certificate course is offered several times per year and is a 10-week intensive course focused on applying sustainability practices in your business. With readings, a sustainability project, and a business scenario to run, you will get to work closely with program colleagues from around the globe and will find your own mindset shifting about the deployment of sustainability in your work, no matter whether you occupy the role of chief or contributor. It was the catalyst to help me determine my mission for the next chapter and the steps to get there. And it's what's keeping me grinding through some of the most challenging hurdles of the food industry today. I'm excited to be kicking off this focus, as well as continuing the monthly podcast featuring snippets from our guest speakers who've been joining the Research Chefs Association Hustlers Under 40. Jump to the Peas on Moss website to sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get notification of what's next for the next month. Talk to you next month, and stay healthy, stay focused, check on your buddies, and eat well.